So what we're going to have a look at today is a little bit more detail, is one of the hormones that we were talking about last week. So let's have a quick recap. We can have a look at the major glands that are in our body. So as a quick recap, we've got the thyroid gland, the adrenal glands, the testes in a male, the pituitary gland. If you remember, I described that as being the master gland, the one that controlled all of the glands that were inside the body. The pancreas, and that's one of the glands that we're going to be looking at today, and then the ovaries down the bottom. So those are all the different glands that we've got inside the body. So what we're going to do is we're going to focus on a few key words in today's lesson. So our first one, we're going to be having a look at the control of glucose levels inside the body. Now, if you remember that glucose, this is the science name for sugar. Glucose is travelling all around the blood inside your body, and it's really important that we keep the glucose levels at a steady level, otherwise it can cause you a lot of harm. Now, glucose is controlled by two hormones. One of those hormones is called insulin, and one of those hormones is called glucagon. So we've got two separate, these is a hormone and this is a hormone, and they are both involved in the control of the glucose levels. Now, both of these hormones are made and released from the pancreas. Now, if you remember, I said that you've got this master gland that's in the brain, the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland controls their release. So the pituitary gland sends a message to the pancreas, and the pancreas will either release insulin or it will release glucagon. So these two hormones. And the other word, which is a new word that we're going to look at today, is a substance called glycogen. Now, glycogen is a storage substance, storage for glucose. So glucose gets converted into glycogen inside the body, and it gets stored, and it's how the glucose gets stored. Now, you can store glycogen inside your muscles, and glycogen can also get stored inside your liver. So if you've got lots of really high glucose levels in the body converts the glucose into glycogen and stores it. And I said there were two places in which it stores it. It either stores it in your muscles or it stores it in your liver. And these two hormones, insulin and glucagon, are made by the pancreas. They're both involved in either increasing the glucose levels or decreasing the glucose levels inside the body. So quick flick back to have a look at these hormones that we've got inside our body. So we've got these different glands. The pancreas, I said, that we're bothered about today, and the pancreas and the pituitary gland, and are just about here inside your body would be your liver. So we've got the pancreas here, and it's not labelled on this diagram, but just here, it's the biggest organ inside your body, would be the liver. So I want you to remember that when we're looking at the next slides that we've got. So what we've got on here on our next slide is how the body controls its blood glucose levels. So we've got the pancreas, which is this funny looking organ here, and then we've got the liver, which I showed you where it was on that diagram. So let's have a look when we click start. So we've now got a level of glucose. We've got a glucose level being constantly monitored by the pancreas, and we're going to have a look to see what happens when we have something to eat. So we have something to eat, and the amount of blood glucose that you've got inside your body is going to increase. So you can see the things that are floating around, those are glucose molecules floating around the body, and they have gone up. So then the pancreas releases into the blood a substance called insulin, and it's one of the things that we talked about. It releases that insulin into the blood, so you can see those little blue insulin molecules going around. And the job of insulin is it makes the liver convert that insulin into glycogen. And if you look, all that glucose is then going into the liver, and it's been stored as glycogen. So you've got that storage compound inside the liver. And if you look at what's happened to the glucose in the blood, glucose in the blood has now gone down. So if we look at what happens if we do some exercise, so the opposite thing. So when we do some exercise, you're going to see that the level of glucose that's inside the blood is going to go right down. You've used all that glucose up because you've done aerobic respiration, and so the glucose has gone right down. Now then, the pancreas releases that other hormone that I mentioned. It releases glucagon. And if you look what the glucagon, we're going to see what happens once the glucagon has been put into the bloodstream. So we've now got lots of glucagon going around the blood. And the glucagon makes the glucose come out of the liver. So glucagon causes the liver to put the glucose back into the blood. Now I know there's lots and lots of names that are really similar. You've got glycogen and you've got glucagon and you've got glucose, and they're all really, really similar. And you're just going to have to remember those different names that we've got there. So let's go back to what we had. We said we were looking at glucose levels, and we've got these two hormones, insulin and glucagon, and how your glucose levels, or then glucose gets converted into glycogen, which is a storage substance for glucose. So we're going to have a look at that. Turn over my board. So let's see, if our glucose levels go up, the pancreas releases insulin. That's the next thing that happens. That causes glucose to get changed into glycogen. I'll do some. So if all the glucose has been converted into glycogen, and the insulin allows the glucose to enter the cells, and it allows the glucose to get converted into glycogen so it can be stored in your muscles and in your liver cells. And then what that is going to cause is that the glucose levels are then going to go down. So glucose levels increase, the pancreas releases insulin, and the pituitary gland sends a message to the pancreas to release it. Glucose levels go down because glucose gets converted into glycogen, and that glycogen gets stored. I'm going to draw a liver there. That glycogen gets stored inside your liver. So if we look at the opposite that is going to happen, so if I just rub these bits out, if your glucose levels go down, the pancreas releases glucagon. That means that the glycogen that's stored in your liver gets converted back into glucose. That glucose goes into the bloodstream and your glucose levels go back up. So it's kind of the opposite of what happened with the insulin. So glucose levels go down, the pancreas releases glucagon. That means that glycogen gets converted into glucose, and the glucose levels then go back up. So it kind of all works together really, really nicely with these two hormones, insulin and glycogen, that you've got glucagon that you've got inside your body. So we're looking at glucose levels and we're thinking about this hormone insulin. Now you know, or you should know, or you may know, that some people have problems with their glucose levels in the body, with their sugar levels, and they have a condition called diabetes. Now diabetes is either where your body is either not making any insulin, or the insulin that your body's making, it's not really working in the way that it should, which can have two effects. It can either mean that your glucose levels stay really, really high, or they can end up being really low because you never manage to store any, and so you use all your glucose level up straight away. So we're going to talk through the different types of diabetes. So we could have diabetes, two different types of diabetes, and you can get type 1 diabetes. Now this tends to be genetic, which means that it is inherited, it's passed down through families, that's so that type of diabetes, and this is where your insulin, the pancreas is not making insulin. There's a bit of a problem, so we've got no insulin. So the way around this type of diabetes, how we can control it, is we're perhaps going to have insulin injections. People might literally inject themselves with it. They might have an insulin pump attached to them, which checks their blood sugar levels, their blood glucose levels, and then puts in the amount of insulin that they need. They might also need to watch their diet a little bit, but they definitely need to have some insulin that's injected into them. Now, the other type of diabetes is type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is associated with obesity, so you're more likely to get it if you are obese. It can be linked with old age. You can get diabetes that's caused by old age. My grandma had diabetes when she was old, and linked with that obesity, we can have the lack of exercise, because it could be the lack of exercise that is really causing that obesity levels. Now, type 2 diabetes, the body is still making insulin, but the cells are not responding. So it could be it's not making enough insulin in type 2. It could be the cells just not responding to it. So the pancreas is releasing all this insulin and it's not having any effect, and that's because the person has got type 2 diabetes. So what can they do to this type of person? Well, if somebody is old age and they've got type 2 diabetes, really they just have to try and control their diet and make sure that they keep a steady level of sugar going into their diet. If somebody, a younger person, has got type 2 diabetes, they'll say look at controlling their diet, reducing the amount of carbohydrates that they're taking into their diet, increasing the amount of exercise that they're doing. And if somebody can become not obese and can lose a lot of weight, then quite often the type 2 diabetes will go away and they'll no longer be a type 2 diabetic. Now, what I would like you to do, having watched this video, there's an activity for you to complete, and that's what I would like you to do now, please.